Hey, welcome back to Making New Possible. My name is Angela Damiani and I am your host. I am very excited to welcome our guest today on the podcast. Glenn Reid is a serial entrepreneur, engineer, and designer. He's worked for Adobe, Ford, and most notably Apple. He's going to share a little bit of his own experience with Steve Jobs, having left Steve Jobs a number of times and having come back to him. But mostly we talk about creative rebellion in general, what it means to be an innovator versus an entrepreneur, and how to cultivate a sense of innovation, both in your team and in the community at large. I am very, very excited to welcome Glenn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Angela, how are you?
Good. I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today.
I'm super excited to be here.
I'm going to admit to everyone that you are the epitome of creative rebellion, which of course is the theme of this podcast because you sent me quite a rebellious response to the questions I wanted to ask you today. But I appreciate that.
Sorry
I was like,
that.
This is perfect. This is exactly the point. We want to be talking to people who perhaps don't comply to the status quo.
I think that's me, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which day you ask.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's a fortunate way of being. So, I don't know, I'm going to start with your very first question, if that's okay.
Sure.
What is it to be an entrepreneur, and how does that relate to innovation in your mind?
The reason I sort of suggested that as a question is I think people conflate these two ideas, that entrepreneurs are always innovative and it's all one big thing. I think they're incredibly different things, really. So an entrepreneur is really just someone who starts a business. It could be a restaurant, it could be a podcast, it could be, an entire VC funded company. Entrepreneurship is much bigger than innovation in a way. Like, you don't necessarily have to have a new idea. In fact, innovation and new ideas rarely lead to new companies. And most of the time they shouldn't. Somebody else should make it into a business for you. So I think teasing those two things apart is key to thinking about this whole space, really. And if you think about innovation and new ideas, often that happens in a university or in a research lab. And, there's no company there. There's a new idea. Sometimes it takes decades for it to actually make it into the world. So entrepreneurship is the act of creating a C Corp and going for it and trying to make a business out of something. So the more I think about this, the more those things separate from each other. So that's why I wanted to kind of lead with that, I guess.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And I do agree that sometimes they can be conflated. I'm curious actually about your impression of the word intrapreneur, having worked inside of big companies as a resident innovator. That word gives me the creeps, to be honest with you. But I don't. What do you think of that? How does that resonate with you?
It's not a thing, honestly. So big companies, and I've worked at several of them. Well, in the U.S., I would say, are quarter-driven profit. Companies need to make money. So nobody wants new ideas inside big companies. If they stamp them out, there's an immune system that suppresses innovation. At the same time, every company wants to be thought of as innovative. So you create these little advanced technology labs and all this stuff. And it really is just a showpiece. And often the company has no intention of commercializing any of the products. So I don't really think it's a thing, although people talk about it and they encourage it right up until, okay, we're done. Can we make this into a product? Oh, no. Briggs and Stratton had that problem. I knew the guy who ran their lab. They had a beautiful lab. They had 3D printing machines everywhere. They made cool stuff. And the company wouldn't put it into the market. So it's a frustrating job. And often the mindset that leads someone to be an intrapreneur means they quit after that and they go start a real company and they become an entrepreneur. So in a way, it's a breeding ground for the frustration that leads to a new company.
We'll talk a little bit about those points in your history when you've gotten frustrated and quit, because you have some big names on your resume, right? Apple, Adobe, Ford.
I do, and
what has compelled you at the moments in time you have to start your own thing rather than stay at a safe, big company?
Somewhat what I just described. Like, you're working on something, you think it's cool, and you realize it's not going anywhere in the actual company that you're part of. And big companies, they're safe. They pay you. They give you a computer and a desk. Cushy comes to mind. So people love those jobs, except if what you really want is things to be real, it doesn't happen there. So sometimes people in the advanced tech, groups at Adobe or Apple, they stay there for 25 years because they just love tinkering around. If you're compelled to go out and find out if people want it and sell it to them, then you have to kind of leave. So I've left for different reasons, but I guess the two things are either working with a bunch of obnoxious people that I don't get along with, which is, has nothing to do with business. It's just like, I can't survive here anymore. Or this is such a good idea, I can't stand it anymore. I got to run out the door and do it. So it's different motivations sometimes. But I guess in one case, it's frustration. In the other case, it's opportunity. Mm-hmm. Opportunity is a much better reason than frustration, actually. But yeah.
But I think the sort of grain of salt or whatever that's like, grain of sand that's in that oyster of frustration can become the opportunity or the motivation you need to actually seize an opportunity that you see. Because you're right, if you're really comfortable or they're taking really good care of you, what is the motivation? It's a lot of work, as you know.
It is, and it's risky, as we know, and it's kind of a crazy thing to do when you get right down to it. One of my people say, what is it that's supposed to be the mother of invention? I always forget what it's supposed to be. But, I don't know, curiosity or something. But I say irritation is the mother of invention. If something irritates you enough, you start trying to think of a solution for it. And I think that's where a lot of ideas come from, is frustration with the status quo. And a friend of mine years ago told me they thought I was an incredibly negative person. I was shocked because I think I'm the most optimistic person ever. And they pointed out that I was always finding fault with things, like that sucks and look what's wrong with that. And I have a mind that does see what sucks about things, but I see it as an opportunity, not just to complain about it. But maybe somebody should fix that, And some of the companies I've started, like Marathon, I was making washing machines and stuff, and like, why would you do that? It just seemed like a good idea. And for 2 years, I was like, somebody should really do that. Somebody should really do that. And then I was like, I guess it's going to be me because nobody else is going to do it. So I think opportunity is more important than the idea itself. Like, does somebody actually want this thing? Is there a market for it? And early on in entrepreneur classes at Stanford or whatever, they talk about, product market fit and customer development. Like, you got to have a customer or you don't have a business. So those things are interrelated. And I think an opportunity boils down to timing and, is the world ready for this? Is the technology there to support it? Do people want it? Can they buy it? Is there a mechanism for them to get hold of it? All those things have to come together.
I agree with you. I'm thinking about my own self-definition. I do think of myself as an opportunist as well, but I've become keenly aware of my own. I think I've acquired a higher risk tolerance over the decades, but I have a very low tolerance for discomfort because I've learned that I have agency to fix whatever situation I'm in. And so for me, maybe it is pointing out, oh, that's like an irritant, but I feel compelled to do something about it rather than to lament it.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Like,
fix it.
Because I know I can fix it, And sometimes the solution is a whole new business, and sometimes it's, I don't know, whatever, a new process.
Sometimes it's duct tape, right?
Sometimes it's duct tape. Exactly.
Use the word agency. I think that's crucial. Like, a lot of people don't think that they have the agency or the ability to do something about a problem. They just sort of think, maybe if I complain about it to the right people, they'll fix it,
Someone else will do it for you.
Yeah. Even just, my daughter, the things I'm most proud of is when she orders like a belt to fix the vacuum on Amazon and fixes the vacuum. I'm like, oh my God, good for you. And it's not hard, but a lot of people don't try. They don't open the hood of their car. They don't watch a YouTube video on how to fix stuff. They just assume somebody else is going to do it for them.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I don't know where that came from, or if it's just sort of learning over time. You know what I mean? That I think some people think, especially if you come through a more classical institution like you're talking about for entrepreneurship, where you're like learning about business. I wasn't raised in that way. I just sort of started doing things and then stumbled into some form of success. But I think I've learned like that I still don't know. Every day feels new. Literally yesterday we announced that we sold one of our companies, which is so exciting. And I woke up today like, well, this is a new feeling, to feel like we sold it and we're on the other side. I don't know how to do this thing. What does it mean to be on this side of it? And to feel like, I don't know, I had like a twinge of jealousy seeing our staff who've been acquired by the new firm, like post how excited they are at their new jobs. And I was like, why am I jealous? This is the whole point. Like, what is this weird, you know what I mean, emotion that's sort of like a late hangover from that whole experience, maybe. But yeah, I think it's that's always the point, is that like every day is different and you just sort of have to rise to the occasion. Glenn, I have to tell you that when I first met you, I was like sort of intimidated by you because I knew you had worked directly with Steve Jobs, and he's sort of like isn't he the entrepreneur, like the one that we all sort of like idolize in some ways, at least in our like modern zeitgeist, as being a prime innovator?
Yeah, he's an icon of some sort, that's for sure.
For better or worse, you know what I mean? I think people have lots of feelings about that. But the thing I love about your story is that you quit on him 3 times. I'm curious about that. Like, what was that about? What inner revolt were you going through? What, you know what I mean? What, and then why did you go back?
Well, I'm thinking to myself, rewrite that passage of your bio, because it's true that I did quit on him 3 times. But the more important thing was he hired me 3 times. That's what I should emphasize.
Sure, exactly, yeah.
And so, yeah, the first time I was young and foolish, and I had been at Adobe. I was in engineering, and they yanked me into marketing, which I didn't want to do. And then I actually emailed Steve Jobs out of the blue when I was, 25 or something, and said, I guessed sjobs at next.com, and it actually got to him. I said, hey, I'm awesome. You should hire me. And he didn't hire me right away, but he did hire me. And but I got hired into kind of a marketing role. And I realized that just wasn't, this is a weird thing to say, but an engineer who moves into marketing, you become tainted. The engineers think you can't be any good or you wouldn't be doing marketing.
Oh,
The reality is marketing is just being able to speak in full sentences and explain things to people. So as an engineer, if you're good at that, you should be a better engineer, but people's you're in marketing, you've got ick on you, So I had to quit to get permission to be an engineer again. I was like, Steve, I'm going to go build software for your computer, start a company to do that, because you need all this stuff and nobody's doing it. And nobody's letting me write software here. And he just looked at me like I was nuts. But he said, if you change your mind, you can come back, which is not something he typically says to people. So I took that as a compliment. I started a company, built a lot of awesome software, found out that Next didn't really sell any computers. There were, 30,000 of them worldwide. So
yeah,
it was really dumb to build software for a market of 30,000 total computers. So I lost some money, but I gained some skills and some reputation. All of a sudden I could call myself an engineer again, and that it reset my career. The second time I got hired back into, not back, I never worked at Apple before, but when Next bought Apple for negative $400 million, Steve came back and he's like, go find Glenn Reid. I want him to build iMovie for me. So I turned them down for a while. The guy who was looking for me, I'm like, tell him I have a job, but whatever. Because Apple was about to fail. I didn't really want to go down with the ship or whatever, but I went and it was great. And then I was ready to I started building iPhoto. Then I wanted to build what became iTunes, and I put a proposal together and I ran it up the flagpole, and they just didn't really respond to me. And then one day I run into this guy in the hallway that I'd met before, Jeff Robin. I was like, Jeff, what are you doing here? And he's like, I can't tell you, which is what secrecy was like back then. What are you working on? I can't tell you that either. Who do you report to? And he reported to my boss, the VP of, consumer software. What I realized was they had gone and bought his whole company to acquire iTunes to become the music app.
Interesting.
Which sucked for a long time. It still kind of sucks, honestly. I was so mad. I'm like, you didn't bother to tell me that? Like, I'm over here pitching that I want to do this. I was livid. And I just literally dropped my badge on the table and said, fuck this, I'm not working here anymore. I don't like this climate that you've
Wow.
created. So that was impulsive, but yeah, I just quit. And at that time, and maybe still, I don't know, but I felt like I could get a job in 4 hours. You know, people wanted what I was good at. Like,
Sure.
I don't need this job. And so my bullshit threshold is very, very low, and they exceeded it. So I quit. And Steve was mad because they had let me quit. And for about 9 months, they were trying to get me back. And I was like, nope, nope, I'm out of there. And they kept, the guy whose job it was to get me back, he's like, please, Steve's yelling at me. Why'd you let him get away? And then they came back after, it was about 9 months I was gone, and he said, we'll double your salary and we'll give you $100,000 signing bonus to come back. And this is in, 1998 when $100,000 was
Oh,
actually a
yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So they brought me back and I came back again. And the third time I quit was several years after that, but it was like Apple had become, the way I like to put it is when you're sitting in a hot tub at a hotel and all the wrong people, or you look around, you're like, I got to get out of here. It had become, there was no longer a company fighting for its life. They were kind of becoming successful, and you get all these, I call them zero value people. They're not negative value. They don't remove value from the room, but they don't add anything either.
It's a lot of
They're,
fluff. Yeah.
yeah, they're just super nice. They just graduated, and oh my God, I'm so happy to be here. But the way I look at it is a company or the world is sort of like a bank. You're either making deposits or you're making withdrawals. And when a company becomes successful, everybody wants to go there to put it on their resume and withdraw from the company, essentially. They're
Hmm.
not bringing anything to it. And that's who was around me when I looked around, just all these super nice MBAs and Stanford grads and wonderful people that they wanted to work there. So I didn't. And I left a little more gently that time, but I left. And Steve was known for, they call it zeros and ones. You're either a zero or you're a one. And once you flip from a one to a zero, that's the end of that kind of thing. So I'd survived that twice, but after the third time, I literally never heard from him again. I became a zero instead of a one at that point.
Hmm.
But I was okay. I put in at least 5 years with the guy, and he has a reputation for being all this stuff, and most of it's only partly true. It's sort of, I think he was a sociopath. He didn't really understand people or care. So um, he was fine with the people around him that he sort of trusted, and he was easy to work with in that way. But if you were kind of useless or annoying, he was mean to you. Like, he'd say things like, "What the fuck are you doing in this room? Get the fuck out!" Like, and if you were that person, you didn't think he was a very nice guy. But the rest of the people are like, "Thanks for getting rid of him. He was a bozo." So he was very expedient at swatting people out of the way. But mostly he was kind of like me and a bunch of other people like us, where you just want to do stuff and build stuff. And he just happened to be more powerful and richer than the rest of us. So he was able to make a lot of stuff happen. But not all of it was great. Like, he did a lot of things that nobody wanted at Next and whatever, but he was relentless. And right up to the point he died, he kept coming to work and wanting to do more stuff. And, he told me once that he was worth $100 million, I think, by the age of 19. And it's like, a lot of people would just retire, but, I don't understand retirement. It's like, don't you want to do stuff? Don't you have ideas? Like, you're really going to play golf? I can't believe that. So he was just driven, I think is the right word.
Yeah, I mean, I think really innately creative, or he's really tapped into that, whatever that is, access to source or something. I mean, I feel the same way. I have a hard time imagining what the end of the story will be for myself, because I love to build stuff, especially the beginning bit. I found the beginning bit is my favorite part,
Hmm.
when it feels like all the options are still your options and you don't have any things you need to
Nothing's
actually
gone
like
wrong
work.
yet.
Yeah, you don't have any workarounds yet. Okay, well, I mean, you designed iMoody and iPhoto with Steve Jobs, but now you're building hardware for robotics. Tell me about that switch over, and how your approach to product design differs from hardware versus software after all of those years of simply doing the
It
software
does seem
bit.
like an unusual switch, doesn't it? Hardware for me, well, I studied mechanical engineering and then I switched into computer science, so I kind of loved mechanical things. And nowadays, everything mechanical is controlled by computers, so it's sort of perfect. But I call myself a product guy. What that means to me is a product is something that people want to pay for. They want to give you their money. Please, here's $20. I love that. And the software industry, especially when I got into hardware, was turning into television. It's like, we'll entertain people for free and sell ads to support it. And actually, most of what we think of as software today is that. Facebook, Google, they don't charge you anything. They entertain you and they sell ads. So that's not a product, and I didn't like it anymore. So I thought the one thing people are willing to give you money for is physical things that you obviously can't make a digital copy of. So it led me into manufactured products just because people will pay money for it. And that seems more pure to me. It's not like, hey, this is free. What do you think?
They're more tangible. Yeah, the value seems more tangible. Quite literally. Yeah.
And people get that viscerally. Like, everyone kind of knows that they can make a perfect digital copy of a song or a piece of software. Why is this costing money? It's obviously trivial to replicate it. So they don't really buy it deep down. It's like, this is bullshit. It's digital. Physical things, even if it's a piece of toast, somebody has to make it, and slice it or break the bread or whatever. So we get that physical things are worth something. As for the process, I think it's the same, honestly. A product is a product, whether there's a hardware component or not. Figuring out how to get it to work, building it, selling it, the process is almost indistinguishable, with some small differences, obviously. Like, if you're making a physical thing, you have to figure out how to manufacture it. Most people use digital tools to do that. You get a 3D CAD program and you draw a picture of it, and then you send it somewhere and they make it for you. So it's surprisingly abstract and digital still, even if the end product is physical. So it's not as big of a leap as you would think from hardware to software or back. Although software people are traditionally afraid of hardware, and hardware people are the worst programmers ever. So being fluent in both of those languages is a surprisingly valuable skill set.
I believe it.
And, there's even jokes that, how many software engineers does it take to change a light bulb? That's a hardware problem. And my hardware friends are like, something doesn't work, check the software. It's always the software. It's always the software. So it's like oil and water. The worlds typically don't mix. But in the end game, the product that you take out of a box, all of them nowadays have both. It's hard to find a product that doesn't have software in it and an electronic chip and a battery somewhere. Even the little cables that, most people don't know this, but the cable that you hook up to your iPods and whatever, there's a microchip in each end of that cable that decides what to do when you plug it into something. That they actually have tiny little processors built into them, which is, it's not just wires. It's kind of crazy.
Huh.
So,
I actually didn't know that. That's interesting. Fascinating. Well, tell me a little bit more about your theory around building like a team. And I guess you could talk about it as you've done it for a startup or in a more traditional enterprise place. Like, I hear you as having a very decisive view of what it means to be a creative person and a generative person, someone who adds credits and doesn't take them away. But how do you do that as a leader? How do you inspire that? Do you have any sort of tips and tricks, I guess, from that perspective?
Honestly, it's very, very tricky. And I've been thinking about this ever since you and I started talking about this stuff. And Nuance was a recruiting company, and you guys have mixed up in that for a long time. But what motivates somebody to join a team sometimes is very different than what you need that person to do when they arrive. So you have to be very careful about not selling them a dream that isn't true when they get there.
No, that's definitely true.
And vice versa. It's amazing how many people I've hired or interviewed, let me put it that way, who didn't bother to understand the product. Like, when I was hiring for iMovie, my first question was, have you ever used iMovie? You'd think it was an obvious question, but about half of them said no.
No, they told you no in the interview?
Yeah.
I want a bunch
And
of
this is at a
dummies.
time when you could go into the Apple store and use it for free. You didn't have to
Right.
buy anything. But it's more like, oh, they wanted to work at Apple. It sounds like a cool job. It was more like, what do I get? And I was like, what do you bring? What are you going to do when you get here? The
Exactly.
other the other piece of it though is if you want to be innovative and you want to make stuff and you want to have new ideas, to some extent, I don't want you on my team. And that sounds really weird, but once you've made a commitment, like I have this idea, I'm going to start a company, we're going to go build this thing. The last thing you want is more ideas. It's like, no, finish the idea we started already. We got to sell this thing. You know, uh, you just sort of want to suppress innovation. And that sounds crazy, but it's true. Like, in order to finish something, you got to stop having new ideas yourself, too. Like, quit adding features, quit having dreams, just finish this shit. And it's a lot harder than it seems. And if you nurture innovation and everybody's having ideas, you fail. And it's
Mm.
fun for a while because it's like kindergarten and there's post-it notes everywhere. But you're you're pursuing a dream and not facing reality. It's sort of like you got to get the stuff done that you already started before you get permission to go think of something new. So finish it, and then like ideas are cheap. Everybody can be innovative or at least have ideas. The key is should I work on that and when? And
And how do you
right now is
prioritize it?
almost
Yeah.
right now is almost never the right time to work on a new idea. It's like nope, that goes in the future sometime.
Yeah, I
And
agree. And
so
I
it's
think having that follow through is really what distinguishes the success, whether you're in a startup or
exactly.
not. Like, I feel like being able to follow through and execute on what that plan is. Obviously, you can go through and build a whole new feature or product and it could not work out
And that's
anyway. But I feel like nothing's going to work if you have a bunch of, open whips and no final
exactly.
thing to deliver.
And if you look at Google as a company, for 20, 30 years, they've had one product. It's a search engine, and they print money in the back room. And they're famous for letting, one fifth of or 20% of your time you're allowed to do whatever you want and think up new
Is that
things.
true? Or is that just a thing they put on their like employment
It's it
websites?
had it was true. I don't know if it's still true because they're coming to their senses a little bit now. But for many, many years it was true. And everything that came out of Google for 20 years had the word beta on it. And, somebody just threw something over the wall. And they did all kinds of stuff, and then they just cancel it. And, it was a playground. There was no adult supervision because they were making so much money it didn't matter. But they didn't finish things. They didn't really productize things. They just kind of amused themselves. I don't know why I chose them as an example, but use the word execution. That's absolutely key. And every venture capitalist, every book that's ever been written about startups, execution, that it's just getting the shit done. So I found weirdly for my startups that you're better off hiring contract engineers, like people will come in and get the job done. And then you pause them when the job is done. If you hire a full-time engineer, they're sitting around when you're trying to be done. They're like, you know what? I made some changes. Like, stop that. But if you're paying them and they're sitting there, of course they're going to change stuff. So there's a time when you do a lot of work, and then there's a time when you stop doing the work and you go and sell it and learn what the customer thinks and collect feedback, and then you go start up again. So it's a very stair-steppy process to develop things, or it should be, I think. There's a trend nowadays, continuous improvement, which I don't believe in at all. I think you got to stop and listen and see what people actually think before you start changing it. And
Right.
people forget to do that. But it's hard to find fault with happy sounding words like continuous improvement. Why would you not want that? Well, maybe it sucks. So maybe making it a little bit more like what you think it should be is not going to improve it at all. It's improvement is in the eye of the beholder, not in the eye of the person who thinks they're improving it, if that makes sense. So a lot of things that engineers do that they think is improving it, like look at Microsoft Word, way too many features. Like take some of them out, please. That would improve the product, but nobody does that. So it's a minefield, and I used the word tricky at the beginning because balancing what inspires people, makes them want to work for you, gets them excited about being on the team, has to be balanced with getting the work done and making the company's goals successful. So I think the best approach is to be clear about that right up front. Like, yeah, we're an innovative company, but we're not innovating right now. We're just getting shit done. Is that okay with you? You know, and make sure that the balance is clear on the way in. And it's not that you completely suppress it, but you have to be businesslike about when to do the new thing and who wants it and how much is it going to cost. And it's very much pragmatics. Yeah, I find it very hard because what attracts people to a small, cool seeming company is I'm going to have so much fun there. Like, no, you're not. You're going to fix bugs and ship stuff.
Yeah, but I think the thing I've learned is that you can create a lot of dynamism when things are being actually ticked off and pushed out. Like you create a bit of momentum. And I think showing people that like, yes, coming up with a new idea and iterating, you know what I mean? People think that that's where you might feel like the win, but I feel like having it actually be completed so you can move on to the next like phase. At least for me, that's where I feel the most like sense of like
You know,
forward
that's a great
propulsion.
point. And
You
in
know,
fact, a lot of these people that you talk to from the advanced tech labs who've been doing fun stuff, the thing that motivates them the most or that demotivates them is like, did it ever go out the door? Did anybody use it? Did it ship? Like that
well,
is
even that what you just
amazingly,
told about your own stories, right? Like you were coming up with ideas or you were pitching products and it was going nowhere. I think it actually can be very demotivating if 20% of your time is spent on fanciful ideas, but they never come to life. I don't
I
know.
think
That
that's right.
sounds like a living hell to me, you know?
No, you're right. And people don't quite realize that on the front end. They're like, this is going to be so much fun. But then they realize, we want this done. We want it out the door. We want to ship
Yeah,
it. We
no
want
traction.
real people to use it.
Exactly. Well, I'd like your take. I've heard parts of this before, but I'd like your, January 2026 take on the importance of community and relationships in all of this. Yeah,
I
where
find,
do you sit today with that?
well, that's a great question. And a teeny bit of context. I have a complicated relationship with community and relationships and all this stuff. And part of the reason is if you think about the words best practices, right? That's another one of those things like, why would you not want that? Isn't that the greatest thing? What best practices boils down to is you're doing the same stuff everybody else is doing. That's why it's called best practices, you know?
You're just copying someone else's idea. Yes.
Yeah, so I find that community and shared experience lead to mediocrity and groupthink very quickly because everybody just wants to agree with each other. And it's sort of weird to have a controversial idea or a new idea. It makes them uncomfortable. So the more coherent a community is, the more the belief system is fixed and static. So, you know, organized religion is like that. It's the world's biggest community, but it's static and fixed. And you're not encouraged to think new things or
Mm.
doubt things or believe different things. You're just encouraged to join and pay your dues or whatever. So I think there's a lot of negativity to some communities, not all. And, you know, I would talk with some of the people of your own, you know, Milwaukee founders communities and stuff. And uh, on the surface, it's amazing. It's like, you know, us against the world, we're the same. But I would tell people like, you don't want to stand next to somebody who has exactly the same problems that you do and complain about them. You should be going to the lawyers meetup or the the bankers meetup and meeting people who aren't like you and who can help you grow in the directions that you're trying to grow instead of complaining, you know, sort of shared misery. It's sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous or something, you know, it's like, hi, I'm Glenn, I'm a programmer. Hi, Glenn, you know. And so that's been part of my negativity toward community. It's sort of like, well, what's the premise for the community and why are you there? And I think communities to me form as a side effect to something that you wanted to do anyway. Like you're like, I'm going to learn to knit. And so you go to the knitting store and you buy yarn and needles and you meet people who are learning to knit. So you become, at least temporarily, bonded to a community that you didn't even know was there because they happen to share the same interests as you. But if it's a community that, like, I'll go back to church to pick on it. You join a church because it's there, because your mother told you to, or whatever, and then you expect something to come of it. So if the community comes first, and then the growth comes maybe never, or there's a second effect, I think it's better if it's purpose driven at some level. And it also goes back to, are you bringing something to it? Or are you taking something from it?
Yeah, I was going to say it's harkening back to that earlier comment. I feel like the only way it really works and is sustainable long term is if you have more givers than you have takers.
Exactly. And even what does giving mean is a little bit hard to define. And a lot of things boil down to contacts. Like, can you introduce me to so and so? And can I meet your friend? Huge value in that. But that's also somewhat finite. And also, there's LinkedIn and virtual versions of that. And so, yeah, it's sort of, and there are people who show up at every event and sort of drain energy from the room. Oh my God, that person's here again. And there aren't a lot of those people, but there are at least as many as there are people who energize the room and bring something to it. So I would just say it's a little bit complicated, and it's not just sort of automatically a great thing. And, if everybody's bringing cookies or ideas or whatever, then communities can be incredibly powerful. If they become habitual, I go to the black sheep because it's Monday. I don't know if I'm going to meet anybody or whatever. I do think, and I see this in a lot of the language around community builders, that there are unexpected surprises, spontaneous people that you meet. I absolutely agree with that. And my negativity is something that I struggle with because I know that I don't see the whole picture. I'm missing something. And every time I force myself to go to something, I end up like, oh my God, I can't believe how great that was, or I met somebody that I never knew existed. So there is value in just serendipity. And one of my mottos, I have lots of mottos, but if you want to be in the right place at the right time, you should start out by being in the right place. Because if you're in the wrong place, the right time is never going to come along. Forcing yourself to go out into the world, into places, even if it's uncomfortable, because there's opportunity there, or there are valuable people. Downtown Palo Alto is sort of this amazing place where, it's the town next to Stanford. So it started being a college town, and it still is. But any college town, Madison or whatever, you can really, literally. And this, I was having coffee on the sidewalk in this little pretentious Italian cafe once, and just watching people. And most of the people in Palo Alto walking down the street are not speaking English, bizarrely. There's people from all over the world that come there because they've heard about it. But this weird guy is riding down the street on a bicycle, one of those, kind of commuter European kind of bikes.
Sure.
And he screeches his brakes and pulls over, and it was somebody I knew. It was the vice president of engineering from Apple, a French guy, typically looked like a mad professor on a bicycle, but he was literally riding his bike down the street and saw me at the cafe. And he stopped to talk to me and tell me about this company he was about to start. And, if I was home, that wouldn't have happened. So you're not always going to run into somebody on the sidewalk or at the night market or whatever. But if you don't go, then you're definitely not going to meet anybody. So, and, I sent you this in email, but I admire you in particular and the whole world that you live in, because the way I think you put it on your website or something is creating a sense of belonging and community. Like, what the heck is that? But I think you have an intuition for what actually gets people fired up to, whether it's like, let's sing this song together, or let's go to this place and build a bonfire. Like, I don't have that instinct. I can suggest something and everybody looks at me like I'm nuts, So you must have an innate sense of what people are longing for. Belonging is a sense of needing something too. Like, I need something. What is it? So I don't know how you do that, or maybe you don't either. It's an intuition. But when you build, or you have an event, or you build a community, or you start something, I've seen, when I watch you from the sidelines, everybody can't wait to show up to these things that you do, even if they have somewhat of a weird premise. Like, I'm definitely going to that, and they invite their friends, and it's a wild success. So there's obviously something to it that I don't completely understand. So I'm glad there are people like you in the world that build these communities, and I'll show up sometimes.
Well, I think there is a method to the madness for sure. I think you're right that you'll never be in the right place at the right time if you don't get up and go. And that's been a very perplexing thing, honestly, since COVID, because the ways people interact with the world have really changed. it's a paradigm that even 6 years later feels like I'm still relearning how will people interact with spaces and places in, I don't know, can we even say new normal after 6 years? At some point it's just normal. This is what it is. I think the only thing I like pine for is like the before.
It's coming back with a vengeance, what I see. And I think San Francisco is a little ahead of the curve in some ways, but everything is in person. Nothing's virtual. Nobody wants to do a Zoom call. And they're having meetups
But there
left
are
and
like
right.
social norms that are just done. Like even within our, like I think the RSVP was dying before COVID, but now it's completely dead. I mean, and it goes in both ways. Like people will RSVP and not show, and people will not RSVP and show. And so, you know, you can imagine from planning purposes, that's a total nightmare.
I went to this thing a couple nights ago. It's called Llama Lounge in San Francisco, and I don't even know who ran it, but it's like super groovy, you know, all the people with expensive shoes, hoodies, and whatever. But I registered for it, and it's free. You just have to register, and that's an RSVP. But to your point, I started getting these emails. Like it started at 6 o'clock or 6:30 actually. They're like, "We strongly suggest you get here at 5. There's a wait list. It's oversubscribed. If you're not here at 5, you might not get in." And the place was mobbed at 5 o'clock. There's people standing on the sidewalk waiting to get in because they were worried they might miss something. So there's something about that. And RSVP is sort of like, there's no downside for not showing up. It's like, oh, well,
I know.
you know.
And
But
honestly,
it's sort of,
yeah, but it's an annoyance. You know what I mean? But I think it happens to me all the time. Actually, people will come up and tell me a story about a person they met or a thing they did at something they came to that, you know, was an unintended consequence for us as organizers. And I am still sort of bewitched by that. I think that's the coolest thing, that there are, anytime you kind of create a platform for people to convene, they'll just having that space available and for people to feel like they're allowed to be there. You know, there's usually an objective. There's a speaker that needs to speak about something or an exchange of goods that needs to happen or whatever. But there are all sorts of things that happen on the periphery that's the part that is the most compelling for me still. Particularly knowing now that, like, I don't know, it feels different. It feels like people need extra incentive. I'm going to steal this idea though. We had a newsletter go out last week actually that announced an event, but it left the date off, which was a mistake. It was a typo. But I had more engagement with that email, people replying back like, I want to go, but when is it? And I was like, is this a way to like get people to actually read shit? Like I intentionally leave
leave the
off
date
like
off.
pertinent information.
Well, you know, I think it's creating the sense of FOMO, fear of missing
Exactly.
out. If
Yeah,
people, that's what makes people show up to stuff like, oh my God, if I don't go, what am I going to miss, you
exactly.
know? So somewhere in between that and RSVP might be the answer. And maybe
Maybe
there's
you'll
no
get in or maybe you
RSVP.
won't. The love of your life or your future business opportunity, it's going to be going to someone
Exactly.
else. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for exploring these topics with me and for being a guest on this show. I really appreciate it. And I hope you'll come back. I feel like there's more yet for us to unpack together.
Happy to come back, happy to chat. And I forgot that we were on a podcast, so I'm unfiltered as always, but it's been a pleasure talking with you.
You're just the best. Thank you.